At a conference like Big Sound, there's a lot of people sort of setting out in their career and trying to, make a mark. Your career's been pretty inspiring in that regard, like 30 years on your own terms, and you haven't had any massive, you've had success obviously, but no massive number one hits or no stadiums.
No.
What sort of lessons have you learned along the way in that regard?
Well, the prime lesson that I've learned along the way is that the definition of success is to do what you always wanted to do and get paid to do it. Whatever you do, as a bricklayer or whatever, And I can't help but feel that the new digital music, record industry rather, doesn't have so much room for people like myself to make a reasonable living, carry on playing for 30 years. People either hit big or they're out on the margins. I don't know exactly why that is. I think that the ability to make a living doing this job is it's harder to get that first foot on the ladder these days. I think very few bands, it seems to me, that get on my radar in the UK get to make their difficult third album. They make a first album, and if that goes all right, they get to make a second album. But that third album is ridiculous, really, because it took me 3 albums to work out who I was and what I did. All the Billy Bragg albums, the songs that people think of me: Leave Us Love's Tears, Greetings to the New Brunette, There Is Power in Union, third album. London Calling is the third album. Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen is the third album. And if you don't even get there, the short-termism in the music industry in the record industry, music industry. I don't work in the record industry, I work in the music industry, in that I make a living doing gigs. The record industry is a bit of a scary place at the moment, while it works out how the new digital business model works. But there are people out there already who are working with artists and realizing that what has changed is that the distance between the artist and the fan has been narrowed down due to the digitization of music. And now you find, some of the independent labels in the UK are now paying 50-50 on digital sales, which I think is fair, more than fair. The majors are still trying to get away with, if you look in major record contracts in the United States of America, some of them still have deductions for breakages in there. Now, the 10% breakage deduction on a standard American record contract has its roots in the days when records were made of something called shellac, which is a rather fragile plastic, and they were in boxes stacked in a pile of 10, and very often, as they were transported, the bottom one would shatter. So your standard American record contract, when I signed one in the 1980s, had a 10% deduction for breakages. Now, you can't really break a vinyl album, you can do that to it and it won't happen. You definitely can't break an MP3. And yet still those deductions are there. And until the industry starts to understand that it makes more sense to empower the artist to get out there and sell, they'll make more money if they, for instance, if the record labels allowed artists as standard to sell their own material through their websites, downloads through their websites, and gave us the same rate as they give iTunes, we could possibly, it does depend on the kind of deals that people sign, but we could start to make an argument whereby artists get more than 50% of the money spent by punters on the record. And I think it's things like that that are going to deal with piracy rather than trying to lock up Kim.com. There are always going to be people like that who game the system and exploit the system in that way. Ultimately, I believe we have to put the artists right to the fore in our interface with the fans, because in my experience, those artists that make music that make me want to cry or dance or sing or laugh, I want to support them. I want to encourage them. All right, I may not want to, give money to some faceless multinational corporation that they work for, but if I know the money is going to them, then I think we are starting to build the moral high ground for making an argument that starts to undercut piracy, particularly if the rights that we have as artists allow us also to market things like outtakes and demos and stuff that the record label just hasn't really got time to put out. And this really works big time for older artists. I work with a guy named Ian McLagan, a great keyboard player who's in the Small Faces. And due to the rather shady contracts that he signed in the 1960s, he doesn't really get any money from the Small Faces, material at all. I mean, you know, when I was on tour with him, we used to stop in a motorway service station on the motorway in Britain, and there would always be a 60s compilation with a Small Faces track on that he didn't get no money from. Now he's still gigging. He could be self-releasing outtakes of the Small Faces. He could be, you know, putting together stuff to sell at gigs and make a decent living. If you had a hit in your 20s, the chances are, you know, you could still be making a living as a musician in your 50s, maybe even in your 60s. And if your entire catalogue reverted to you after 30 years, say, or 25 years, you could carry on making a living. I mean, nobody cares about the solo albums that Ian McLagan made in the 70s. They're not available. They never sold much. I would like to hear them. You know, if he was selling them on his website, I would buy them. But he's not, because the record company is sitting on them. So subsequently, you can only get them on BitTorrent. You know, pop ultimately will eat itself and then shit itself out. You know, they're doing it to themselves. You know, they are doing it to themselves. The good news is, and I've seen this happen a few times, is ultimately independent people come along with new ideas and better ways of doing it. You know, that's what happened. That's what Stiff was, punk was all about. The music industry getting so far up its own arsehole that it didn't have any relevance anymore to artists and to fans, and little labels like Stiff were able to come along, bands like the Sex Pistols were able to come along. And you know, I think that will continue to happen. It's just whether or not that sort of wave that punk was, that wave that swept right through the industry and changed so many things, whether that's capable of happening anymore. I don't know if that is capable of happening, but you know, we just need some of the innovative thinking that's happening at the independent level to work its way up through to the majors, and we could have a completely different industry that does allow people to carry on making a living for the whole of their career. That's all artists want. They want to not have to go back to that shitty job. That's the most crucial day of your life as an artist. It's the day you're able to leave your shitty job and go off and make a living. And if there's no reason in the digital industry why we shouldn't be empowered to do that. You know, we just need a bit of a paradigm shift in thinking among the retailers and the major labels.
Fantastic. I'll throw to the floor quickly, but just one last thing. 30 years in, we've been through a lot that we've just talked about. You've just released Tooth and Nail, one of your most beautiful albums of the whole run. At the end of the day, is the music still all that matters?
Well, I'm not sure it's all that matters. I think to me, what matters really is getting out there and doing gigs. That's the thing that I've always found most satisfying, most challenging, and what really keeps me wanting to, you know, this is what I do for a living, doing gigs, you know. Putting out an album, that's a real big palaver, and it takes a lot of blood and a lot of treasure. It's not something you would do lightly. But, you know, last year when we went and recorded Tooth and Nail with Joe Henry, I felt like I still had things to say. I wasn't ready to just sort of quietly retire, grow a beard, put my feet up. Well, I did grow the beard, but you know, I still wanted to engage with, not just with the audience, but with the record industry as well. And I found good people to work with in the shape of Cooking Vinyl. And, you know, there's a label there that have been allowing the contract I have with them, my records revert after 7 years. I get all my rights back. Yet conversely, I've been with them over 20 years because they do such a good job that I re-sign my records back to them again, you know. And working with people like that, who I know I can trust, and who I know are, you know, giving me the freedom to do what I want to do, and I'm happy in that kind of atmosphere. I'm happy to play ball, and you know, if someone gets the back of their leg pissed down, well, what can you do? It's all part and parcel of it.
Awesome. Let's throw to the floor. Has anyone got any questions for Billy? Raise hands. Closest here first, mate. Has someone got a microphone we could...
A roving mic, they're just going to get it, unless you can do hand signals.
Just a gentleman over here, in the second row.
Thanks for coming, Billy. It's been a great presentation.
Thank you.
We hear a fractured tale about Mr. Blair and his relationship to the music industry. Were you part of the invitations to number 10 there for a while. Did he re-embrace the red wedge?
No.
What do you remember about that period?
No, I'm afraid I was persona non grata really during the Blair years, which is ironic really because one of his head honchos, a guy named Jeff Mulgan, used to drive the red wedge van. But ultimately, the problem that Blair had with red wedge was the red bit. I can actually remember being at the meeting where we decided on the name, and one of the Labour Party's liaison people who was sat around the table with us actually did say, you know, that name, it kind of suggests that you're all socialists. And we're like, yeah. So, not really. As I was mentioning earlier, I'm a content over style man. Blair was. In that sense, he was a new romantic rather than a punk rocker Blair, I'm afraid. So no, but I mean, the thing about that is, you just have to find good people that you can work with. And that's what I've done at elections, I've been fortunate to still have some connections with people there that have helped me to engage. At the last general election in my hometown in East London, where I grew up, where my family still live in Barking, the British National Party, a racist, fascist, whites-only party, were trying to take over the local council and get an MP elected. And they thought they were going to do it. They already had 12 council members, which was unprecedented in Britain for a racist party to do that. And I spent the election out there campaigning, knocking on people's doors, asking them to vote for the Labour Party. As a result of that, and not, a lot of people were out there, huge campaign, we were able to stop the British National Party from winning any more seats. And they lost every seat they had. We chucked them out of town. So, if I'd have been squeamish about Blair, I wouldn't have been able to do that kind of work. But ultimately, you've got to find people that you're comfortable with, people, individual politicians you can work with, and work with them, which is what I've sought to do through the Blair years.